either. Diane, normally on our meetings, we like to offer folks a trivia question, but we didn't pull anything together today. If anyone, Tommy or Diane, has some random trivia they would like to offer to the audience, we are up
Not
for
good
it.
at trivia.
Well, Diane, are you calling in from Fairfield today?
I am, yeah.
I feel like there's got to be some sort of good Fairfield related trivia question.
I'm sure there is. Let me think.
The last time we had a guest from Fairfield on, I asked the trivia question, what college was where Maharishi International University currently is?
Mhm.
And the answer is Parsons College, as I'm sure you know. And I believe I've heard legend that is the same university that the movie Animal House is based off of.
Oh, I think that's true.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
It was known, I think earlier in its incarnation, it was a good school, but then it became known as a party school and a school that a lot of people came to avoid the draft, during the Vietnam War.
Definitely. And then it's amazing to think about the transformation then that it underwent once Parsons closed down and Maharishi moved in. How long have you been living in Fairfield, Diane?
Oh, since 1995, December 1st, 1995.
Very nice.
We've been here long. We moved here to raise my kids, and because we were living in the Washington, D.C. community at the time, and this is a way better place to raise your kids.
I can believe that. I think we need more families like that in our small towns. Got to shout that message from the rooftops.
Mm-hmm.
Small towns are a good place to raise your family.
And it's funny. A lot of people who did move here, a lot of their kids moved away because when you're growing up in a community, you just want to go someplace else. But what's happening is that a lot of the kids that are now in their 30s and 40s, they're coming back here to raise their kids here. So it's a really good environment for something like that.
Yep. Well, that's what we're all about here at Iowa Farmers Union, our small town resiliency, building communities that are meant to last, good places to raise families. And Christina, do you think we're good to go and get started here?
Yeah, I think people are slowly trickling in. I want to remind everyone that this is streaming on IFU's Facebook page. So if you need that recording, if you want to share it, that's where you can go. If you aren't a Facebook user, just email me and we'll work on getting the recording. Yeah, I think it's time. And this is a bigger audience than we normally have. So let us know where you're joining us from. I know this issue spans many states. So tell us where you are in the chat. Make sure that chat is working for everyone. We're curious. So yeah, Tommy, go ahead and get us started.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. And a special thanks to Diane Rosenberg for being with us.
Thank you, Tommy. It's great to be here.
As we are getting ready to host an all you need to know about CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations information session with one of Iowa's finest, Diane Rosenberg, who has been working on the issues around CAFOs for many, many years. We are so grateful to have this opportunity to have Diane here to share kind of a wide span of overview of what she's learned and be able to share out to folks in the state. And so what kind of will be covered during this introductory session are an in-depth discussion to understand what CAFOs are, how their ownership functions, how much they cost, who pays for them, but also the ways that CAFOs affect people, the environment, our rural communities and local economies, how the industry continues to argue for CAFOs, and then how the DNR in our state regulates CAFOs. And then most importantly, as the Farmers Union, as people living in rural America, what we can do to make sure that our voices are being heard with respect to these really important issues. So real quick, I'll pass it over to Christina Dexter for a few updates on the Iowa Farmers Union side of things, and then we'll get started with the programming with Diane. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. That was a great summary of what we're going to be talking about here today. So I have a few things for everybody in the audience. I'm going to make it fast. Tomorrow, our Lunch and Learn programming is going to be going on as normal. We'll have Kate Hansen with the Center for Rural Affairs as our guest. She's going to be talking about crop insurance coverage, kind of as a risk management tool, what is available for organic, diversified, and or small operations. She'll cover best practices as well as newly available programs. She'll give us a really nice run through of all the things that are happening in that space. Saturday, we are having our annual potluck barn party. So you all may be familiar with the event. We do it every year. This year, we're encouraging our members to bring their friends, bring their neighbors. We want a big turnout. We're so excited to see everyone in person. We'll be joined by Laura Bellin from Bleeding Heartland. She is the lead author and editor, and Bob Leonard, who is a New York Times contributing author. So we'll hear from those folks on the current state of agriculture and politics, and also another reminder, we're looking for volunteers for our booth at the Iowa State Fair starting on August 10th. So sign up, come, host the booth with us for a shift. I think they're 2-hour shifts. And then you'll get a free ticket to the fair and you'll get to spend some time talking about IFU values with fair goers. So we'd love to have you. I'll put all of these links in the chat for everyone. Tommy, that's all I have for updates.
Yes, and in case you're on the fence about whether to come to our party on Saturday, there will be a sweet corn eating contest. So you will not want to miss that. And I see we have folks calling in here from both coasts, New Jersey, Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Washington State on the other side of the country. And then obviously, Oregon here, and then lots of folks from the homeland here in Iowa. So everybody that's joining us, please put your questions in the chat as they come up. Diane is going to be sharing for about an hour with her material, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So thank you so much for being here. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Diane.
Thank you very much, Tommy. And thank you, Christina. And thank you for having me be here with you all today, talking about CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, factory farms, all the same thing. As Tommy said, I've been doing this for a long time. I joined JFAN in 2007. I've been with them all this time. I worked with the Socially Responsible Agricultural Project for 9 years. So I've had like 16 years of experience working in this whole area. When I first came on the JFAN board, I thought, I'll never know, I'll never understand, I'll never know as much as everybody else does. Well, I've learned a lot, and I want to share a lot of what I've learned with you today. But this is really the tip of the iceberg, because JFAN is working with the Iowa Farmers Union. We're going to be offering I think it's a 5-session training program at the beginning of January 2024 about how to really protect your community, how to create an organization like JFAN in your community. And we'll cover soup to nuts on what it's all about, including strategies and everything you'll need. Basically, I'm just opening up everything I've learned because I just want as many organizations around the state being able to work to protect their communities, just as JFAN has been working to protect, Jefferson County here. We need to all work together to really bring about the kind of an agricultural environment that we want. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint that I'm just going to be. Let me start. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. So As I mentioned, JFAN, it was founded, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about JFAN. We were founded in 2005. We're a community organization and we work to protect our county from CAFOs. We monitor the county for CAFO activity. We alert neighbors if a new or expanding CAFO application is proposed, and we send out an information packet, a pretty extensive one. And then if the community wants some help and asks us to help them fight a CAFO, we will come and help them with informational guidance and support. But it's up to the community to do the heavy lifting, to do the work, but we'll give them all the support in the background and everything, you know, that they need to be able to do that. We do extensive community education. And I would say that's probably, excuse me, how the bulk of my time is spent. We also work on the state level to promote stronger regulations, like we're doing right now with the review of Chapter 65, which covers CAFO regulations. I'll be talking about that at the end. Very hard toward a factory farm moratorium. JFAN is a co-founder of the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture, which is a coalition of 30 community, state, and national organizations advocating for a factory farm moratorium. Excuse me, the allergies are getting to me today, so excuse me if I'm a little bit froggy here. I want to say right up front that JFAN is not anti-agriculture. We are not anti-livestock farming. We're not a vegan or a vegetarian organization, even though we're based here in Fairfield, Iowa. We're big supporters of traditional independent livestock farming, and we support responsible, respectful, and regenerative agriculture. But we don't consider CAFOs responsible, regenerative, or respectful. Now, there's a lot that I want to cover. I can't possibly fit it all in, everything that I'd like to, so there'll be time for some questions and answers at the end. You know, but I'll do my best to, you know, cover as much as I can in this hour. Before I do, I want to say that I'm going to be speaking primarily about hog confinements, because that's the majority of CAFOs in Iowa. And that's pretty much what I've worked with. I have done one chicken confinement on the southwest part of the state. But a lot of what I share also applies to, you know, livestock in general, you know, confined livestock in general. But I'm going to be really focusing on hogs. Okay, so to start with, what I want to do is let's start with the comparison, a traditional farm versus a CAFO. So in a traditional farm, these are independent farms, independent farmers raising and selling their own hogs. They're deciding how to manage their farms on their own. They may have contracts with a company like Nyman Ranch, where they sell their hogs directly to them for a good price. They also may sell through direct markets, restaurants. They may sell off the farm. They may sell through websites. A small number sell through public markets and auctions and stockyards and public stockyards. But unfortunately, traditional farming has become more of a niche market right now. I don't think it'll always be that way, but right now that's what we're dealing with. Now, in a traditional farm, hogs are allowed to graze or root around outdoors. That's their natural behavior. They may be raised in a hoop house. That's what you see in that bottom right picture. And they're raised in a hoop house. There's deeply bedded straw. So that's where they can root around. They can also go outdoors. You know, all of this allows them to express their natural behaviors. When they're outside, their waste products fall onto the ground. And then it starts to decompose aerobically. Right away, the soil microorganisms start to break it down. And then the fresh air, the sunlight, it all starts to break these waste products down. And, you know, the livestock walks over it, starts to grind it into the soil. And basically what it's doing, it's building soil health. If you've got a hoop house operation, the straw is cleaned out, it's composted, and then it's added to the soil as a rich fertilizer. Now, all farms have odors, but a traditional farm has a typical barnyard odor, which is not offensive. It's a different odor than a CAFO, which is very difficult to breathe in. Farms are smaller. Traditional farms are smaller. They're largely self-regulating. Antibiotics are not used routinely, I should say. They're primarily used to treat an ill animal, but they're not used as a prophylactic as they are in CAFOs. And the nice thing about traditional farms too is that it keeps profits within the community and builds local economies, supports local business infrastructure. And for centuries, these were the kinds of farms that existed in the United States. But about roughly 60, 70 years ago, the industrial model came on the scene. It was actually quite by accident. And there's a really good book that I could highly recommend that gives you the history of the growth of industrial agriculture, called The Meat Racket by Christopher Leonard. Highly recommend that book. I learned a lot. The CAFO industry started with chickens. So you'll learn a lot, and it takes you through the whole explosion of CAFOs. So now let's go and talk about what a CAFO is. In a CAFO, hogs are confined their entire lives, packed into buildings like this. You may see single buildings like this around the state. You may see multiple built together, but that's how they're raised. As they grow, they have very little room to move. They can't practice their natural behaviors. They receive routine antibiotics, to protect against disease, since they're living in a confined and closed space with each other. Sows are often in gestation crates, where they can only stand or lie down. When they give birth, they'll be in a farrowing crate, which is very similar to that. I don't have a picture of one, but it's very similar to that. But they're more separated from the other pigs. But the piglets can reach them, but the piglets are on the other side of the bars. But they can reach to suckle through those bars. They stand on slatted floors, these concrete, very unnatural for pigs, on these hard concrete slatted floors. And they do that so all their urine and feces can drop into a 6 or 8 foot pit below, where it just sits for anywhere from 6 to 12 months, and it just putrefies. And this combined urine and feces, this liquid manure, I'm going to be using the word manure because it's just so commonly used, but it's really raw toxic hog sewage. Okay, it's like human sewage, but it's hog sewage. And it decomposes anaerobically because it does not have access to air or light or those soil organisms. And that creates over 300 volatile organic compounds, including about 150 gases, of which hydrogen sulfide and ammonia are 2 of the worst. I'll be talking about those in a little bit. And they create terrible odors, particularly the hydrogen sulfide combined with the ammonia. It's really bad. Some CAFOs, older ones, may have a manure pit outside, a lagoon outside. And in those, the pits are about 2 or 3 feet deep, and then pipes just pump out the manure and just store it, just open like that in the lagoon. Now I want to go back to this picture because CAFOs have pit fans on the side of the buildings, and they have to run those pit fans 24/7. Otherwise, the toxic gases would kill the hogs in about an hour, or anybody else that's in there. And you might sometimes see very large fans on the ends of the CAFOs, which don't always run. And that is for climate control. Now, through those fans, all those gases are blown out into the community. And not only are the gases blown out into the community, but there are particulates that are blown out into the community that include dander and dried feces and dust, because CAFOs are really dirty inside. I once had a student work, just do some work around my house one time, who one summer worked in a CAFO. And he said it was the dirtiest place he has ever been, and he never wanted to go in there again. So that all is getting blown out into the community, and people are breathing those gases and those particulates in. Now, it's important to understand that these facilities are run for economic efficiency. They're a low volume, low margin, high volume business. Decisions are made based on profitability, and hogs are treated and even called sometimes protein units. So we'll talk about what it means to live near a CAFO in a little bit, but I want to show you this slide first. So as of March of this year, we have 23.4 million hogs in CAFOs. As of today, we have 9,266 CAFOs, most of which are going to be hogs. We do have a lot of chickens in Iowa, egg-laying chickens, but you put a lot more chickens in a building than you do hogs. And we have about 4,000 CAFOs, which are small animal feeding operations. Those are approximate number because the DNR doesn't track them. Those are under 500 animal units, which equates to 1,250 hogs. So it's anything smaller than that is in a CAFO. The Iowa is the top hog producing state in the nation. I've got a hair in my mouth. Out of 72.9 million hogs in the United States, again, these are March figures. Iowa is raising 23.4 million, and that's at one time. We have 23.4 million at one time. We do about 50,000 or so a year. Minnesota has 8.9 million hogs, North Carolina, 8 million hogs. So we raise 32% of the country's hogs. It's a lot. And a little over a quarter of our pork is exported. And, most people think that it's China that's the big importer of our pork, but it's actually Mexico. Mexico first, Japan, and then China and Hong Kong. Huge huge exports to those countries, but those are the top three. And then Canada, South Korea, the others follow. And since we raise 32% of the hogs in the country, I'm going to guess that we're exporting more than just 27.5% of our pork products. More than that are going to exports. Let me talk a little bit about types of operations. There's several types that can be built. First is a breeding and gestation CAFO. And in one of those CAFOs, you've got sows that are basically gestating. Most of them are in gestation crates. The last figure that I was able to pull off the internet is 60 to 70% are in gestation crates right now. Proposition 12 is going to change some of that, we hope. In these gestation crates, sows are impregnated. They live their life in just like not being able to stand, only being able to stand or lie down, can't move. They're induced to give birth, and then they give birth a nurse in the farrowing crates. Once a piglet is weaned at 3 weeks, it may be moved to a wean to finish operation, or it may be moved to a nursery. So in a wean to finish operation, the CAFO is going to raise the hogs from when they're about 3 weeks old, about 15 pounds, until they reach their market weight of 280 pounds. In a grow to finish operation, they're going to come from the nursery. The nursery is going to raise the pigs from about 3 weeks until about 6 weeks, until they reach about 50 pounds. Then those go to the grow to finish operations. And the buildings are a little bit different. They're built a little bit differently. You know, and there's, you know, you see online, there's what's better, wean to finish, grow to finish. I don't have the answer, but those are the two ways that most of the finishing hogs are raised. Again, to grow to finish is to 280 pounds market weight. And then a farrow to finish is everything is done under one roof. Now, it's important, I want to mention these different types of operations, because if you're ever looking at a manure management plan, the type of operation determines how much manure is calculated. That operation is going to generate in order to figure out, you know, where you're going to put the manure and how much and all of that. We'll talk about MMPs in a little bit, but that's actually it's important to know, because they're all going to create a different amount of manure. Typically, CAFO farmers, CAFO owners, I hate to call them farmers, CAFO owners raise 2 to 2.5 cycles of hogs each year. You know, they raise them till they're about 5-6 months old, and then they go to slaughter. I'd like to note that if they were not slaughtered at such a young age, a hog has a lifespan of 12 to 18 years. So they go pretty early to slaughter. Now, I was at an Iowa Groundwater Association in 2017, and at the DNR presentation there, it was revealed that we have enough cropland in Iowa for 45,000 CAFOs. That boggles the mind. Now, it may be somewhat limited by separation distances, which I will get into in a bit. But the state legislature, that's hair. The state legislature could address that, you know, if they wanted to, because they have addressed different things when they've wanted to in order to promote the business. Let's talk now about who owns CAFOs. There's two different scenarios, and I'm going to talk about those in a moment, but I want to first define a term I'm going to be using called the integrator. The integrator is the large corporation that owns the hogs. They source and grow the feed. They slaughter, process, market the meat products. These are people that contract growers will work with, or when they're building a CAFO. And they're called integrators because everything is vertically integrated into this one model of raising meat. And you know, you've heard of many of these integrators: Smithfield, JBS, Trio, Prestige. I understand JBS just purchased some of Trio's assets. I'm not sure what all they have purchased. You know, Reichsview Farms, which is really big up in northeast Iowa. These are all examples of integrators. Now, one of the types of ownership is the contract grower. And they are contracting with the integrator to grow to raise the hogs for the integrator. Now, they own the land and they build the confinement. So they have to either purchase the land or they use this land they have, and they have to mortgage a confinement. And a 2,500 head confinement is approximately $750,000, $750,000. 1,200 head is going to be about half that. That's substantial. And they're mortgaged over a 15 to 20 year period. And the contract grower is responsible for managing and maintaining the building, disposing of the manure, they get a price per head or price per pig space on the farm. I was looking for a figure. These figures are really hard to come by. Joe Maxwell at a meeting that we had on a farm bill a few months ago mentioned $42 per hog that they get per head. But then you have to subtract all of these other expenses for managing the farm, the CAFO. So they're not making a ton of money on one CAFO. Now, if your community is opposing a CAFO, they're a little bit easier to oppose because there are community ties. The contract grower has community ties to the community. But CAFOs are not easy to stop in Iowa. I'm going to be honest, they're not easy to stop, but it is possible to stop them. And so I want to put that out there. I don't want to be a Pollyanna, but people have stopped them and there are strategies for doing that. Now with the contract grower, the corporation owns the hogs, they deliver the hogs, they provide the feed a couple times a week in these large semis. They provide the veterinary care, they provide drugs, they provide detailed instructions on how to raise the hogs and how they want their buildings constructed. Those costs are all covered as part of in the contractual arrangement. When a CAFO owner signs on the dotted line, they're locked into the contract. The integrator, though, often has the ability to change the contract as they see fit. And an attorney that I talked to a number of years ago, about contracts, he used to review contracts for people that were considering buying a CAFO. He told me that these CAFOs are really written for the benefit of the integrator. And he used to try to talk people out of signing them. When the hogs achieve market weight, the corporation picks up the hogs for slaughter, processing. The contract grower cleans out the pit and is ready, in a couple of weeks or so for another cycle of hogs. Now, as I said, the contract grower gets a price per head, but after the corporation pays that to the contract grower, they are processing and marketing the hogs, the pork, and they're making the lion's share of the profits. So even though the contract grower makes something, they are not making the majority of the money on each hog. Now, another scenario is you have a corporation that owns everything. The integrator owns everything. And they basically buy the land, they build the buildings, they hire people to run the CAFOs. They're harder to fight because they don't have that community connection like a contract grower does, but it's not impossible to fight. There's been, I have had success with some with Iowa Select because, they have a very, they're really invested in their image. So there's strategies for fighting, corporate owned CAFOs too. There's other scenarios too, other creative configurations, but these are the two basic ways that CAFOs are owned. And integrators will often do both. They'll often work with a contract grower or they'll build their own. They'll have their own corporate owned CAFO. Let's look at how CAFOs are funded. So contract growers can get loans from local banks guaranteed through the Farm Services Agency for up to 85 to 95% of the cost of the mortgage, okay? They also can get funds from EQIP, the EQIP program. EQIP is theoretically supposed to cover conservation efforts and help producers meet environmental regulations. But EQIP has to, is right now has to use 50% of its funds for livestock. They can grant up to $450,000 per investor for the confinement pit, because that's supposed to be a conservation effort to keep the manure from going off onto the land. And what's kind of galling is that EQIP focuses on projects of environmental significance. And that means larger CAFOs get more of the money because they have a bigger environmental impact. And small scale farmers who may want to do more conservation efforts that would really help the land don't get as much. There's a Senate bill right now, 658, that would require that 50% requirement, that would eliminate that 50% requirement and lower the cap that a CAFO could get to 150,000. Advocates are trying to work it into the Farm Bill. I think the IRA fund legislation is also trying to address that issue. Not sure how the IRA and the Farm Bill are all going to come together yet. So I wouldn't say anything is a definite on that end. And one other way that CAFO owners get some financial help is through the pollution control tax exemption, known colloquially as the pit tax exemption. And that's a tax break for having a pollution control system for air and water quality for any industrial building. If they can contain air and water pollution, then they can get an exemption for the part of the building that does that. Well, for a confinement pit, a CAFO, that's they get the square footage for the pit, which is where most of the value of the CAFO lies. And so they get a property tax break on that square footage of the confinement pit, which, rubs me personally the wrong way, because they're getting a tax break for containing pollution, but they're like water pollution, for the manure, but they're creating air pollution in the process. So the kicker too is the way the agricultural taxes are levied. Other agricultural land owners subsidize that pit tax property exemption that the CAFO owners get, and their agricultural taxes are a little bit higher. And that I have qualified with Iowa State Association of Counties and with my local assessor. I made sure that was the case, and that's definitely the case. And the last time I looked in Jefferson County, there was about $1 million that CAFO owners were getting for this property tax exemption. And in Washington County, that has 1 million hogs, it's $5 million. So it's substantial. Why do people build CAFOs and not traditional farms? Well, as you've seen, it's very easy to walk into a bank and get a loan. It's easy to walk into a contract because you can get that loan. It's very hard to get bank loans for small farms. I've talked to farmers who have tried and struggled and don't even try to do it because they know it's so difficult. With working with an integrator, everything is supplied by the integrator. Many people do it because they want the manure for their farm. Many do it because they want to stay on their farm and bring in additional income to the farm. And many do it because it's easier to manage it's less work than a traditional farm. So there are reasons why people do this, and there's a market. It's because everything is vertically integrated. There's a big market for CAFO meat, and not as big of one for niche, traditionally raised hogs. CAFOs can be built almost anywhere. There are some exceptions. You can't put one in a 100-year floodplain by a major water source for some obvious reasons there. There are some restrictions and guidelines for building on alluvial soils that are not in the floodplain. And so that's soils that are deposited by running water, more sandy soils. There are restrictions to build in karst, terrain, where you have to have more, the concrete standards are a little greater, and you can't build an earthen basin or be within 1,000 feet of a sinkhole. But it's really bad practice to build CAFOs on karst bedrock, because I like to use the analogy that karst is like Swiss cheese, the kind of bedrock. It's got like these, it's these channels. I guess that's the best way. These channels, it's like Swiss cheese. So if you're applying manure on the soil on top of the karst, the manure is percolating down with the water that eventually percolates down into the aquifers below, and it's bringing some of that manure with it. It's going through the bedrock, and it's going into these aquifers that are below the bedrock, and it contaminates a lot of the groundwater. And that, unfortunately, for people that are on private wells, that can contaminate their wells. And it can contaminate spring-fed streams like we have like in Northeast Iowa. And we have a lot of karst in Northeast Iowa, but in a county like Howard, where there is karst, you still see a lot of CAFOs. And the federal government doesn't even have good regulations protecting the karst terrain. So it's a terrible practice, and it's just not well protected. Now, there also are some separation distances required from waterways. And depending on the size of the CAFO, there are separation distances from homes, schools, churches, and public use areas. The larger the CAFO, the greater the separation distance. But it's not significant. It's not a lot. And but a CAFO under 500 animal units, there are no separation distances except for water sources. And you can have a CAFO right next to your house, like this unfortunate homeowner in Washington County that has a CAFO located 174 feet away from his bedroom window. CAFOs are often built in areas where there's less economic vitality, so people are less able to fight back. Often it's an environmental justice issue. Let's move now to the regulatory process. And I'm going to be talking about animal units here versus the number of hogs. So I'm just going to tell you that animal units are the measure that the DNR uses and the EPA uses. And an animal unit is based on one cow that's a beef cattle. Dairy cow is 1.2 animal units. Hogs are 4/10 of an animal unit. So that's how we come up with these figures, that 500 animal units is 1,250 hogs. So the regulatory process for those CAFOs under 500 animal units is no review, no manure management plan, no separation distance except for water. And if 1 acre of land is going to be disturbed to build a CAFO, which is not necessarily true, sometimes it is for a CAFO this size, then an EPA NPDES stormwater permit number 2 is required. And that is a kind of permit that is required for any building, school, house, church, hospital that breaks more than 1 acre of ground. And that's pretty much it. For 1,250 to 2,499 hogs, which is 500 to 999 animal units, that's considered a medium-sized CAFO. And for that, a manure management plan is required, and the MMP provides the location of the CAFO. It provides who the owner is, how much manure will be generated, how much nitrogen and phosphorus is in the manure, where it's being applied, how much it can be applied on each field, and more information besides all of that. And it's complicated. It's a complicated document. Usually CAFO owners have companies that do these manure management plans for them. And the DNR just does a cursory review. They do not do an in-depth review. I've done in-depth reviews of manure management plans. They can take a couple of hours to do. But the DNR doesn't have staff to do that, so they don't. When a CAFO developer is going to submit an application for a medium-sized CAFO, they have to deliver applications to the DNR office and to the county courthouse. And at the courthouse, it's typically the auditor or the supervisor that receives these applications and stores them. And the date that is stamped on the application when the county courthouse receives it is the date that starts the calendar for when a CAFO can be built, because they can start building after 30 days. They also need a construction design statement, which is basically a checklist of how they're going to construct the CAFO. There's no formal engineering plans, even though these are structures that are going to impact, quite a bit the community around them. Also an NPDES permit, because they're definitely going to break an acre of ground or more. There's no formal review. And as I said, a cursory review of the manure management plan. And then the DNR will send out a letter that says, at the 30-day mark with the date, that's when you can start building your CAFO. They can move things around on the ground, but they can't start digging until that 30 days. So they can clear land, but they can't start the digging until the date, that 30-day mark. Now, a large CAFO goes through a larger application process. Again, all the things that we just discussed with this medium one, plus a construction permit application that reveals all the owners and all the CAFOs that those owners own, a master matrix in adopting counties, a water permit if 25,000 gallons or more a day are being withdrawn. I've never come across that, because that would be an enormous hog confinement. I think that's more with cattle, a large cattle feedlot or something like that. The field office does the cursory review of the manure management plan, and then they go out on the land and they do a site inspection and check distances to make sure that all the distances that are either being taken in the master matrix or the minimum separation distances I showed you before are in place. It also goes through an engineering review, and that's the engineer basically reviews everything else that has to do with the confinement. They also review the master matrix if it's failed by the supervisors. The supervisors, once they learn about they get the notice, they have to file a legal notice within 14 days that this CAFO is being proposed and that they are accepting comments, for like a 30-day period. There's usually 30 days from when the CAFO was first proposed. Usually they are a postage stamp size legal notice in your newspaper. So it's good to check those. And then the supervisors may hold a public hearing. It's optional. Many of them do. And for a large CAFO, it's a 60-day review process. Now, I have to say, in Iowa, a majority of the CAFOs come in at that 2480 to 2499 head mark to avoid this permitting process. I'm going to talk about the master matrix, but before I do, I just want to show you this slide, because this is what happens when the manure management plan reviews are cursory. This is a slide of a section of Penn Township in Jefferson County. That's where we have most of our CAFOs. And you can see all those different colors that we have on the plat map represent fields that are in different CAFOs. And you can, and those numbers are indicative of a specific CAFO. So you can see where we have anywhere from 2 to 5 CAFOs applying manure on one particular field. And this, I mean, I'm at a loss for words. This is not the way to manage water quality in the state. But the way the DNR right now has their manure management plan, manure management enforcement and oversight set up, it's all cursory. We've made a lot of recommendations to put this, to computerize this, and I mean that's a whole discussion in itself. But this is not working. Okay, this is definitely not working. The master matrix, the controversial master matrix. It's a 44 question application. And this was implemented in 2002 after local control was removed in 1995. And this was kind of like the lip service to local control. Oops, what do I do here? There we go. And it's 44 questions. It's a numerically based application, 44 questions that you can receive a total of 880 points. It's self-scoring. It covers air, water, and community impacts. The questions are very weak. It's a weak distribution of where the points go. You only need 440 points to pass. And I was never able to pass a test when I was in school at 50%, but with this, but has such an impact on the community, it's a 50% passing grade. Now, supervisors score the master matrix. Occasionally, it's the head of zoning or public health, but they score it. And if the questions are adequately answered, they are forced to approve the master matrix, even if they oppose it. If they approve the master matrix, but there are significant issues with it that they either didn't catch or didn't care to acknowledge, the DNR doesn't review it. It's a done deal. Passed, it's passed. If the supervisors don't pass the master matrix, then the DNR reviews it, and they can overturn the DNR, the supervisor's failing grade for the master matrix. Once a permit has been issued, it can be appealed to the Environmental Protection Commission, even if the supervisors have approved the master matrix. But it's the supervisors that have to do the appeal, not the general public. And then that appeal goes to the Environmental Protection Commission, which is a 9-member commission of political appointees. And they're very sympathetic right now to the CAFO industry. So this is a failed system, and it's not working. And if it's ever overhauled, it's going to need a major overhaul. Let me talk a little bit about how DNR enforces what they can do, what they can't do. So the industry is self-regulating. The DNR, because they are not nearly well enough staffed. We have 6 field offices, and each field office takes, covers somewhere between 15 to 18 counties. So they do not have the staff to enforce things the way I personally would like to see them enforced in order to protect the community and the environment. They take an attitude, they trust the CAFO owners to do the right thing, which many do, but some don't. And they rely on complaints to investigate problems. So they will go out and do an investigation if a complaint is filed, and you can file a complaint by name or anonymously. If they find a violation, a lot of times they coach for compliance, which basically means they're going to teach the CAFO owner how not to violate again. But they, you know, when they do a fine, it's insignificant. It's only $10,000. You know, that's the most the DNR can do, which is, you know, the cost of doing business. A lot of times, some of the fines are 3,000, some are 5,000. They can be referred to the state attorney, but they're often not. So it's not an effective organization. I have a lot of frustration with the DNR, but with that said, I'm also going to say that there are a lot of good people working at the DNR that I've worked with, and I've learned a lot from a lot of the people there. The problem is at the top. The problem is the political appointees at the top. So let me move on. I've got a lot more to go, but see, I'm wasted a lot of time so far. I want to talk a little bit about the impact of CAFOs, and a lot of it starts with manure because it's anaerobically decomposing, creating those volatile organic compounds and gases. The hydrogen sulfide that I mentioned before, it's a really bad one. It impacts the central nervous system. It's a heavy gas, so it settles in low-lying areas. So if you're living in a bit of a valley and the CAFO is higher than you, those gases are going to settle where you are. And hydrogen sulfide, you know, when you're affected by it, it causes nausea and vomiting, headaches, foggy thinking. You know, it's very, very unpleasant, can affect your lungs, and it can be deadly. There've been worker fatalities in confinements because of that. Ammonia affects the lungs, the particulates, the dust, dander, and feces, that impacts the lungs. And the manure also contains antibiotics, heavy metals, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, hormones from cattle, viruses. It's not the same thing as, you know, a traditional farm's animal waste. So there are health impacts. The ammonia and hydrogen sulfide cause all of these, you know, chest issues, coughing, the nausea, diarrhea, and vomiting, sore throat, eye irritation, runny nose, weakness, depression. Now, all of these things that I'm telling you right now, these are all documented in studies. And we have a lot of studies, about a 4-page list of studies that document all of these things that I'm going to be sharing with you right now, that I think Christina is going to put in the chat, and I think we can also email it to you later on. And, you know, depression, children who attend schools near CAFOs have higher incidences of asthma. Children living on farms with CAFOs, where antibiotics were added to the feed, have a higher incidence of asthma. Neighbors, you know, can experience more depression, tension, anger, fatigue, confusion, less vigor. It's a North Carolina study. It's hazardous for CAFO workers. They're breathing in all that stuff as when they're in the buildings. So they have a greater chance of developing chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, from breathing in that air from the ammonia and the particulates. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria is a big threat. And a lot of this originates from livestock, the way we are dosing our animals with prophylactic antibiotic use, low dose antibiotic use. The CDC reports, I think that's FDA, excuse me, reports 29 million pounds of antibiotics are fed to livestock for growth promotion and disease prevention. Primarily now it's for disease prevention. We don't have time to get into the guidelines for that, but there's a lot. It's even with the FDA guidelines that have come out in the last 10 years, there is still a lot of antibiotic use. 78 to 80% of antibiotics are used in livestock production. About 3 million people a year get an antibiotic resistant infection. In my family, I had 2 family members that got one. 48,000 or more fatalities from infections every year. Those are CDC studies from 2019, their latest report. $4.6 billion in medical costs a year from the CDC report on fighting, and treating these infections. MRSA, methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, that's what we had in our family. There's a big connection with CAFOs. University of Iowa study found 70% of swine and 64% of swine workers had the same strain of MRSA. Neighbors living within 1 mile of a CAFO had 3 times more chance to colonize it. Usually it's colonized in your nasal passage. You can come down with MRSA from that potentially, or spread it to someone else. 11% of MRSA patients lived next to a field that got manure. This was a Texas Tech study that found that MRSA was traveling in the wind. The DNA of MRSA was traveling in the wind for miles. And CAFO workers can carry MRSA in their nasal passage for 2 weeks, even if they've been away from the CAFO for 96 hours. Antibiotic resistant bacteria is on the meat that you buy in the supermarkets. You should assume most of that meat is from a CAFO unless it's clearly marked that it's not. And the Environmental Working Group did a study in 2010 that they updated in 2015. And these are the figures, like a vast majority of the of turkey, pork, and beef is contaminated with some type of antibiotic resistant bacteria. Chicken, they're 36%. The turkey, pork, and ground increased from 2010 to 2015. The chicken decreased by 3 percentage points, but not a whole lot of change. What I can recommend to you is if you handle meat from the supermarket, just wash your hands really well, 20 minutes, 20 seconds, hot water, soap and water. Just do that and wash your surfaces down. You don't want to fool with that. There are quality of life impacts from CAFOs. People that live near CAFOs, the stench really impacts their lives, where they keep their windows shut. They don't entertain as before. They don't garden as before. They're afflicted with flies and sometimes even mice, a lot of dust. People don't hang their laundry outside if you're Amish. And that's where you hang your laundry. That's you're going to get that smell in your clothing. People become prisoners in their own homes. And there's a lot of frustration and anger and grief that goes along with that. Property values decline. Studies have shown up to a 40% a drop in property value or more. You have to disclose if you're selling, and there's a CAFO, you have to disclose that. And it's sometimes you can't sell your house. I've had people that have not been able to sell their house when a CAFO came by. It took them years to be able to sell their house. Rural economies suffer through road disintegration. There's a loss of rural infrastructure because of the vertical integration. So we've lost our feed stores and lockers and abattoirs and hardware stores, some vet services, and that has led to an exodus from our rural communities into the urban communities, and that reduces the tax base for counties in order to provide the services that are needed, and to create for the rural area to really thrive economically. And a lot of this is actually a picture. I don't remember which town this is, but this is from somewhere in Iowa. Many towns are shells of what they used to be. Personal relationships, rural community relationships suffer because CAFOs are controversial, split apart family and friends. Often people don't want to speak up against a CAFO because people that they know are involved, or sometimes they're just afraid. I run into that a lot. It causes a lot of resentment, and it has destroyed the fabric of rural communities, and it's really sad to see that. Excuse me. Water pollution is a big one. You know, we've got 22 billion gallons of raw hog sewage that's generated every year from these 0.4 million hogs and 13,000 CAFOs in the state. Since 1996, we've had 1,120 reported manure spills, 200, excuse me, 270 beach advisories since 2006, 4.7 million fish killed from animal waste since 1993. Right now, the last 303D list that is sent to the EPA listing our impaired waters, we had 751 impaired waterways with 1,235 impairments, and 797 of those 751 needed a TMDL, which is a total maximum daily load. In short, that's a plan, a water pollution plan to reduce the pollution in the water. They're not happening. Half of Iowa's waterways are impaired, and only half of Iowa's waterways have been tested, you know, for these lists, these EPA lists. Two of the biggest pollutants are nitrogen and phosphorus. Those are from non-point sources. 92% of nitrogen and 80% of phosphorus comes from non-point sources, which is agriculture. Plus you've got, you know, all these other pollutants that are in our waterways. Nitrate pollution is a public health hazard. The EPA limit is 10 milligrams per liter. You know, at that limit, then infants can come down with blue baby syndrome, which can be fatal. But there's even problems with drinking water with 5 milligrams per liter or more. There are studies that have shown that people have a higher incidence of colorectal cancer, bladder and ovarian cancers. Drinking water, there's a correlation between drinking water with even at 5 milligrams per liter. And birth defects. The University of Iowa study showed birth defects in children whose pregnant mothers drank water at that 5 milligram level. And spina bifida was one of the ones that, you know, resulted. Phosphorus pollution, you know, we have the growth of blue-green algae from phosphorus pollution, and that sucks the oxygen out of the water, which in turn kills fish and aquatic plants. And one type of blue-green algae, microcystin, is especially toxic. It can make people very sick, you know, digestively, skin reactions, liver damage in people that swim in ponds with microcystin. Children and pets are especially vulnerable. Dog going into that kind of water can be fatal. And you can also find in our waterways protozoan parasites like Cryptosporidium and Giardardia. Giardardia, can't say that very well. And those can make you quite sick. And this pollution, we have a water crisis problem in Iowa. This pollution is affecting our public and private drinking water, private wells, as well as our municipal systems. It's resulting in fish kills, the reduction of the use of recreational waters, especially in these, you know, summer months, contaminated fish, and significant health threats to Iowans. So it's a big problem. You know, it's a big problem. I'm running out of time, so I just want to mention that there are food quality issues with eating meat that come out of CAFOs. It's higher in omega-6s, lower in omega-3s. You want the opposite balance for a healthy diet, and it's an opposite balance that you get when you're eating meat products, meat, dairy, and eggs from livestock that's raised on pasture. There's a lot of foodborne illnesses that take place every year. 48 million people get sick from things like E. coli, salmonella, Campylobacter bacteria. 128,000 people hospitalized, 3,000 people die. You know, you don't. This is our industrial system. What we have created with our industrial system. Gonna talk quickly about some of the arguments you hear from the industry that the hogs are very comfortable in their CAFOs. You know, they're warm, they're dry, they're fed, got a climate controlled environment, they're safe from predators. But the reality is that these are not natural habitats for hogs. Hogs are very happy living outdoors. You ask any traditional farmer, they're happy living outdoors. They're allowed to express their natural behaviors. They're intelligent, social animals. They have the intelligence of a 3-year-old. They get bored in confinement and they get stressed in confinement. And some die just from the stress itself. If you hear a screaming hog, if you ever happen to be sitting, being parked near a screaming hog, a CAFO, parked near a CAFO, and you hear a screaming hog or drive by, that's a sign of stress. That is not a sign of happiness. The mortality rate in CAFOs are 6% versus 1 to 2% in traditional farms. So I would say these are not the best environments for the animals. We're feeding the world. Now I hear that all the time, and it's almost like a holy invocation. We're feeding the world, but we're not. First of all, 70% of the world feeds itself from small farms, and an environmental working group study that they did in 2015 using US export data found that 86% of our agricultural exports go to the 20 wealthiest countries: Canada, China, Mexico, European Union, and only 2.3 go to the 19 poorest countries. So we are feeding the wealthy. We are not feeding the world. You'll hear arguments like, I don't smell my CAFO, but there are studies that show that you can have olfactory nerve damage to your, from breathing in the toxic fumes. So could be a good reason why people are not smelling their own CAFOs. There's an olfactory deficit from that. People say we're responsible, but the model itself has problems. You'll hear things like our family never gets sick, we care about the environment, you're anti-agriculture. I'm running out of time, but I will tell you that people that work in mines, coal mines, don't get sick too. It doesn't mean that coal mines are a good place for anybody to work. And this is not an anti-agriculture stance. On the contrary, we support more farmers on more farms raising livestock responsibly, respectfully, and regeneratively. So I'm going to conclude here with a few ways to protect yourself. One, learn as much as you can about CAFOs. There's some links at the end that are information rich in CAFOs. Monitor for CAFO activity weekly from your DNR field office, your county auditor's office. If one is proposed, organize your community, work with organizations that can help you fight the CAFO. We've got a booklet on our website that has a lot of good information on how to oppose and organize a community. Take this training program in 2024 with the Iowa Farmers Union, and lobby and support a factory farm moratorium, because we've got to stop more development before we don't want to reach 45,000 hogs, CAFOs in Iowa. And action steps coming up. We've got this Chapter 65 rules review. We're going to have a comment period on the next revision of Chapter 65. This is really important because this next comment period is going to be including a cost benefit analysis. So we have to argue for keeping our rules strong there. So stay tuned for announcements from JFAN and the Iowa Environmental Council. Get on our email lists because we'll be advocating for public comments during that period. And I had to rush through the last part of this, but here, learn as much as you can. Here are some really good websites for you. And thank you very much for having me come and give this presentation today. I hope this was helpful.
Diane, thank you so much for this. That really was everything you need to know about CAFOs, all wrapped up in a nutshell. And I know there's so much more depth that we could go into. And we know this is just the beginning of the conversation as we prepare for hosting more sessions like this in 2024 to go more in depth. And everyone out there, thank you for joining us today. We have some time for Q&A now. And I want to encourage everybody before we go into Q&A, please keep putting your questions in the chat. We've had a lot of great questions come in, but we will take them all and help them. If we can't ask them today, we'll use them to help craft the sessions moving forward, and continue to be asking these questions whenever you go out into public spaces. But Diane, if you've got any more time here, we've got just a few questions I want to hit on.
Yes.
Start with kind of the quick answers, and then we'll get into some more depth, and we'll try to wrap up right around 1:30. So first, going back to when you said that Iowa has enough cropland for 45,000 CAFOs, this question asks, is that for the physical CAFO structures themselves or for the manure application, and on what basis is it making that argument?
Yeah, so this was during that Groundwater Association meeting. This was Paul Petiti made that presentation at the time. So he said, we have enough cropland to support the amount of manure that 45,000 CAFOs can produce. And he said there could be instances where it may, physically may not be able to put 45,000 on because of separation distance requirements. So, but and separation distance requirements from other CAFOs or from waterways. But the DNR, the state legislature kind of addressed that already in a number of years ago in Northwest Iowa, where they changed the law because integrators initially used to be considered part of the common ownership, common management of CAFOs. So they were taken into account when putting CAFOs, the separation distance from CAFOs. And the DNR removed that requirement for integrators to be part of that so they could put more CAFOs together. So I wouldn't put it past the legislature to potentially change, if they wanted to, the separation distances to allow more CAFOs to be built.
Yeah, and so related to that question with kind of the placement of CAFOs, we have a question here about the master matrix. If we were to want to challenge the requirements necessary to pass the master matrix, so things, potentially adding in things like increasing the number of points given for impacted waterways or adding in points for community input, how would we begin to achieve that? Would it be legislative? Would it be some sort of executive order? What would your steps towards changing the master matrix be?
Yeah, it's the legislature doesn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. It would have to be through legislation. I know Iowa CCI tried to address it a number of years ago through rulemaking, I believe, but that didn't, if I have that correct, but that didn't go anywhere. So it would have to be through it would have to be through legislation. I don't think an executive order would hold because, you know, it could be revoked in a follow-up, you know, gubernatorial administration. It would have to be through legislation. It needs a major overhaul. And truth, in fact, I think every CAFO should have the master matrix. Every CAFO should be permitted. Everyone should have the master matrix. And it should be made way stronger than what it is.
Well, we've got our work cut out for us in the legislature then, to tell the stories of real Iowans to our legislators and let them know that we need to strengthen that master matrix. Next questions are related to water, both water use. So how much water are CAFOs using, especially as we're seeing year after year of drought, and we're concerned about our aquifers. What's the water use like in CAFOs? And then on the other side of it, what's the are there sufficient water quality monitoring systems in our state, and what needs to be done? You know, our land can hold this amount of manure, but clearly our waterways are not handling the application very well. So both sides of the water equation there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't know the actual amount of water. I used to know it. I don't know it off the top of my head right now, how much water a hog drinks per day, you know, so, but I know it's not, it's significant. You know, what they do in these CAFOs is they have these watering systems, so they can only get, you know, they try to save, they can only get it through this, it's almost like kind of like a, I don't think it's a suction thing, but they'd have to suck at this little device, you know, to get the water. So it's not, they try to save it as much as possible because it costs them, you know, a lot of times, you know, if they're on if they're not, if they don't have a well. But in terms of, so I don't really have a good answer for that, unfortunately. I could probably get it. But in terms of how, you know, I think you were asking me how we are handling the testing of our waterways. And the testing from what, and I ran this question also by Alicia Bastu at the Iowa Environmental Council. So, so it's the Iowa Water Quality Information System that is this, are the sensors around the state, the 66 to 70 sensors around the state. That's real-time monitoring that is accurate. So that's taking place. And I know that when there are investigations of water, like spills or fish kills, the DNR comes out and, you know, they send samples up to the state hygienic lab that I think is at the University of Iowa, and they do the analysis there and then send the reports back there. DNR used to have an Iowa water program, which was defunded a number of years ago, and that was where citizens could go out and measure and do water testing. We don't have that anymore. But actually, the Socially Responsible Agricultural Project, SRAP, they have a water rangers program, and they will teach people how to monitor and report in. So that's, you know, and how the DNR, you know, DNR has their own systems of how they evaluate the data and all of that. I don't know specifically how the DNR does that, but I know that, you know, IQUIS and the hygienic lab are a big part of that. And it would be interesting to see if they would accept, you know, citizen testing like they used to. But right now they don't.
Yes, very good. I know in some watersheds, they do have funding for citizens to go out and test water, but the Iowa water, it's definitely a big program that needs to be brought back here.
Yeah.
Next question, the next couple will be focused more on the marketing side of things a little bit here. And so back in the late 50s and early 60s, there was lots of changes in federal farm policy. Earlier we're speaking about how EQIP and the credit guarantees make it very easy for CAFOs to get funded. But if we look back even further than that, there's potentially a bigger influence, and that's the ending the minimum price floors and reducing the supply available that eliminated lots of the traditional farms where you had livestock and crops on the same farms. How could you talk about how this larger policy change might influence the future of agriculture and start to revert more towards diversified farms?
I'm not a federal policy expert, so I'm going to qualify that right there. But what I can say is that a lot of the funding arms that we have right now through the federal government support industrial livestock production, whether it be subsidies for corn and soy and other commodity crops, the EQIP program, these guaranteed loans, that has to flip, that eventually has to flip. And what we need to do is start to move the funds that are given to these confinements, into small scale operations. And what also needs to be done, and it's have to be like on a federal level, a lot of the costs that the community is bearing because of these CAFOs are, these are externalized costs. The CAFOs are not paying for the road repair. They are not paying for the water, cleanup. They're not paying for, they're not paying for people's medical bills, from living there. So all these costs that I was, mentioning before, these are like externalized costs. And there has to be some sort of legislation in order to flip that around. But the ag industry has such a stranglehold on our government that you almost have to go back to the source, or you've got to reform campaign finance laws, so that lobbyists, don't have as big an impact as they do. There's no simple answer to that. It's a big, complex answer. I will say, and I don't know if this is my idealism or I'm hoping, or just practicality. This is not a sustainable industry the way it is right now. Okay. Something is going to take it down at some point. I don't know what it is. Something is going to take it down. It could be some public health, major public health epidemic linked to CAFOs. It may be, an epidemic amongst the livestock that they can't handle, kind of, like that African swine flu. It could be some economic meltdown somewhere. It could be the environment, the climate, it's something, it's not a sustainable system. So at some point, something I feel is going to start to chip away at it. And I hope it doesn't crash where it hurts people, but something I think is going to change. But I'm, like I said, I'm not a federal policy expert, but from what I see, that's kind of how I can answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. And we always like to have some optimism thrown into these webinars. That was a bit of an optimistic and also a pessimistic viewpoint on things. With obviously, it's going to be a big deal when this industry does collapse. Agriculture does influence so many things. And in addition to the government, we also had a couple questions here that I don't think we'll have time to answer today, but I at least want to mention about how agriculture not only influences the government, but it does influence our public perception as well. We have one question here that talks about the way that that industrial agriculture presents itself at places like the Iowa State Fair. Able to do all this kind of PR stuff with feeding the world, as you mentioned, and happy pigs and all this sort of stuff, they've done a really good job of convincing people that they're farming the right way. And then we also have a question in here about the meat market and how much individuals consume meat, and whether or not it is possible to sustainably raise all the meat outside of CAFOs that the world is currently eating, or whether we'll have to actually shift consumer eating practices. So those are questions for another time as we're getting to our 1:30.
All good questions. All good questions. And I wish I had more time. Like I said, there's a lot to this. There's a whole lot to this whole industry, this whole situation. And I'm just gonna do like another little plug for the training program that we'll have in January that'll really go into more detail about a lot of these things. And some of these questions that are coming up, you know, we can incorporate them into, you know, the training program. You know, and maybe we can maybe what we can do is have someone who come that is a federal policy expert to cover that aspect, you know, because that is that's not an area that I'm you know, can really speak as authoritatively as many other people can, but I can talk about a whole lot of other things. So
that's great, and I'm so glad to see we had over 60 participants in the room with us today. I'm so glad to see that it's going to take all of us. It's going to take people like Diane. It's going to take federal policy experts, but it's just going to take citizens in their towns talking about these things. And these issues have been taboo for too long, and it's time to start talking about them as concerned people of Iowa. So thank you everybody for joining us for this Iowa Farmers Union presentation with Diane Rosenberg of JFAN to talk all things CAFOs. Christina, is there anything else here to do before we wrap up?
I think that's everything. I'll just remind folks to join us in Elkhart on Saturday, and also to volunteer at the state fair. I added a few slots recently, so you can help us with our local food demonstrations. So look in the sign up and you will see those.
Yeah, some of our local food demonstrations will be about making sausage, but using sustainably raised pork from John Gilbert's farm, who's a Nyman Ranch producer. So different kind of meat than CAFO meat for sure. So thank you all for coming. Thank you so much, Diane. And we look forward to much more of this.
Thanks
for having me. Thank you. Bye, everyone.